The rifle cracked through the morning silence, and another deer fell to Ezekiel Drummond's steady aim. Blood stained the frost-covered leaves as he approached his quarry, the same crimson that had haunted his dreams for 7 years since Gettysburg. His weathered hands, scarred from both battle and isolation, worked quickly to field-dress the animal. The meat would last him through another week of solitude in his cabin beyond Millhaven's borders. Most folks in the small Pennsylvania village crossed themselves when his name was mentioned. The war had ended 3 years ago, but Ezekiel remained the phantom of Pine Ridge, the Confederate deserter who'd fled north and made himself a hermit rather than face either army's justice. His gray uniform had long since rotted away, replaced by buckskins and a mountain man's beard that couldn't hide the haunted look in his steel blue eyes. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by young Timothy Wickham, who left it on a stump 50 yards from Ezekiel's cabin door, close enough to fulfill his duty, far enough to avoid the cursed man's presence. Ezekiel found it hours later, the envelope already dampened by mountain mist. His name was scrawled across it in unfamiliar feminine handwriting, Mr. E. Drummond, Pine Ridge Settlement. Inside, pressed flowers fell to the cabin floor as he unfolded pages of delicate script. The letter was from Cordelia Ashworth, writing from a ladies' charitable home in Baltimore. She explained her situation with startling honesty. 20-8 years old, plain of face, cursed with a clubfoot that made her limp, and carrying the shame of bearing a child out of wedlock. 3 different men had contracted for her as a mail order bride, and 3 times she'd been sent back to Baltimore when they saw her step down from the stagecoach. "I have heard," she wrote, "that you are a man who knows what it means to be cast out by society. Perhaps we might find in each other what the world has denied us, both simple companionship and the dignity of a home, shared honestly. Ezekiel." Read the letter 7 times before the sun set. No woman had spoken to him in years, save old Mrs. Patterson, who sold him supplies and spoke only of prices and weather. The idea of feminine laughter in his cabin, of cooking smells that weren't his own rough attempts, of someone to speak with beyond the 4 walls that had become his prison. It stirred something in his chest he'd thought the war had killed. That night, he sat by candlelight and penned his reply with a hand more accustomed to triggers than tender words. He told her of his exile, his shame, the blood on his conscience, and the loneliness that had become his closest companion. He warned her that the people of Millhaven would shun her as they did him, that his cabin was simple and his life harsh. But if she could accept a broken man seeking redemption through honest labor and quiet affection, he would welcome her. He signed it simply, Ezekiel Drummond, Pine Ridge Settlement, Pennsylvania. A man hoping for grace he doesn't deserve. Cordelia's response came faster than expected, carried by the same reluctant boy, who now made weekly trips to Pine Ridge. Her letter was briefer this time, but filled with quiet determination. She would arrive on the October stage, bringing only what she could carry and asking nothing more than honesty and kindness in return. Ezekiel spent the following weeks transforming his hermit's den into something resembling a home. He chinked gaps in the cabin walls, built a proper privy, and constructed a second room with a bed frame carved from mountain oak. His hands, steady as stone when killing, trembled as he carved wildflowers into the headboard, a woman's touch for a woman he'd never seen. The stage arrived on a crisp October morning, its wheels crunching through fallen leaves as half the town gathered to witness the spectacle. Ezekiel waited beneath the great pine that had given the ridge its name, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird. He'd trimmed his beard and donned his cleanest shirt, though both still marked him as a man apart from civilized society. When Cordelia stepped down, supported by the driver's arm as she favored her twisted foot, a collective murmur rose from the gathered crowd. She was indeed plain, as she'd claimed angular features, mouse-brown hair pulled severely back and wearing a travel-stained gray dress that had seen better years. But her eyes, dark as mountain pools, held depths that spoke of intelligence. And suffering transformed into strength. Behind her came a small figure, a boy of perhaps 7 years, with his mother's dark eyes and hair the color of autumn wheat. Cordelia lifted her chin as she faced the whispering townspeople, her hand protectively on her son's shoulder. "Mr. Drummond?" Her voice carried across the square, clear and unashamed. Ezekiel stepped forward, removing his hat as his mother had taught him decades ago in a world that no longer existed. "Miss Ashworth, I'm honored by your courage in coming." Their eyes met, and in that moment, two souls recognized the familiar weight of judgment and exile in each other. The boy she'd called him Jeremiah in her letters pressed closer to his mother's side, studying this mountain man who might become his father. "This is my son," Cordelia said simply. "He knows our circumstances and has agreed to this arrangement." The crowd's whispers grew louder, but Ezekiel heard only the steady breathing of the woman and child before him. He knelt to bring himself to the boy's eye level, his massive frame suddenly gentle. "Jeremiah," he said softly, "I've prepared a room for you in our cabin. There's good fishing in the creek and plenty of woods to explore when you're ready." The boy nodded solemnly, then whispered, "Are you really the soldier everyone's afraid of?" "I was," Ezekiel replied honestly, "but I'm hoping to become something better." Pastor Henley performed the ceremony right there in the town square, his words hurried and his manner disapproving. But the vows, when spoken, carried the weight of two people who understood that marriage could be salvation for the lost. As Ezekiel slipped a simple band of mountain silver onto Cordelia's finger, she smiled, the first genuine smile that had graced his vision in 7 long years. They walked together toward Pine Ridge, the woman's uneven gait matching the deliberate pace of a man carrying all their worldly possessions. Behind them, Millhaven citizens dispersed with shaking heads and pitying looks, certain they'd witnessed the union of two cursed souls destined for misery. They couldn't have been more wrong. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing Pine Ridge in 3 feet of snow that trapped the unlikely family in their mountain sanctuary. What could have been a season of awkward strangers learning to coexist became instead a time of gentle discovery and growing affection. Cordelia proved herself far from the helpless woman society deemed her to be. Her clubfoot might slow her steps, but her hands were quick and capable. She transformed Ezekiel's bachelor cabin into a true home, stitching curtains from flour sacks, weaving rugs from strips of old clothing, and filling every corner with the warmth that comes from someone who cares about creating beauty from humble materials. More importantly, she possessed an educated mind that had devoured every book the charitable home could provide. During the long winter evenings, while Jeremiah carved wooden animals by the fire and Ezekiel mended traps and tools, Cordelia would read aloud from the few volumes she'd brought Shakespeare's sonnets, passages from Emerson, and stories from the Bible that spoke of redemption rather than judgment. "You have a beautiful voice," Ezekiel told her one February night as she finished reading from Psalms. "Why did you never marry before your troubles?" Cordelia set the worn book aside and gazed into the flickering flames. "My father was a professor at a small college. He educated me as he would have a son, believing knowledge was the greatest gift he could provide. But educated women frighten men, especially when they're not beautiful enough to overlook the inconvenience of intelligence." "Their loss," Ezekiel said simply, and meant it. Jeremiah, meanwhile, blossomed under the attention of a man who treated him not as a burden or shameful secret, but as a son worth knowing. Ezekiel taught him to track animals in the snow, to identify edible plants, to whittle and shoot and survive in the wilderness. But more than skills, he gave the boy something he'd never had, a father's patient guidance and quiet pride. "Why Did you become a soldier? Jeremiah asked one afternoon as they checked rabbit snares together. Ezekiel was quiet for a long moment, watching his breath form clouds in the cold air. I thought I was fighting for something important. But war turns men into monsters, no matter which side they're on. I did things I can never undo. But you stopped, the boy said with the clarity that sometimes comes from innocent observation. You ran away and became good again. I'm trying to, Ezekiel admitted. Every day I'm trying to. As spring began to show itself in tentative buds. In longer days, the three had settled into rhythms that felt natural rather than forced. Cordelia would hum while cooking, her voice filling the cabin with melodies that made the walls seem less confining. Jeremiah chattered constantly about everything he observed, bringing life and laughter to spaces that had known only silence. And Ezekiel found himself looking forward to each sunrise, eager to see what small joys the day might bring. The first real test of their fragile happiness came with the spring thaw, when isolation ended and they would once again face the judgment of Millhaven citizens. But by then, something had taken root between them that was stronger than the opinion of others, the beginnings of genuine love, growing slowly but surely like mountain wildflowers pushing through late snow. None of them spoke of it yet, but each felt the change in glances that lingered longer, in accidental touches that neither pulled away from, in the comfortable silences that spoke of hearts beginning to trust. Spring brought not only wildflowers and rushing streams, but also trouble in the form of Deputy Marshal Cornelius Vance, who arrived in Millhaven with a faded wanted poster and questions about Confederate deserters. Word spread quickly through the village someone had finally reported Ezekiel's presence, and the law had come calling. Cordelia was in town buying supplies when she overheard the marshal questioning shopkeeper Aldous Grove about the hermit of Pine Ridge. Her blood ran cold as she realized the life they'd built was about to crumble. Without hesitation, she gathered Jeremiah and hurried back to the cabin, her clubfoot making the mountain path treacherous in her haste. "Ezekiel," she called as she burst through the door, "there's a marshal in town asking about you." He looked up from the harness he was mending, his face growing grave. "I knew this day would come eventually. I'll pack what I can and head deeper into the mountains. You and Jeremiah should return to town, maybe catch the next stage too." "No," Cordelia's voice was firm. "We're not running, and we're not separating. We face this together. Cordelia, you don't understand. They'll hang me for desertion, or worse. I won't have you and the boy branded as harboring a fugitive." She moved to where he sat and took his weathered hands in hers. "I understand perfectly. You're my husband, and this is our home. We stand together or not at all." Jeremiah, who had been listening with wide eyes, stepped forward. "I won't let them take you, Papa Ezekiel. You're the best father I've ever had." The word Papa hung in the air like a benediction. Ezekiel had become father to this boy not through blood, but through daily acts of love and guidance. The thought of being torn away from them filled him with a desperation he hadn't felt since his darkest days of the war. That evening, as they sat around their simple table sharing what might be their last meal together, Marshal Vance appeared at their door. He was a lean man with intelligent eyes and graying hair, wearing his authority with the weariness of someone who'd seen too much of mankind's failings. "Mr. Drummond," he said as Ezekiel opened the door, "I believe you know why I'm here." "I do," Ezekiel replied. "May I ask who reported me?" "Anonymous letter. Doesn't matter now." The marshal's gaze moved past Ezekiel to take in Cordelia and Jeremiah, noting the simple but clean cabin, the obvious care in its arrangement, the family Bible open on the table. "May I come in?" What followed was the longest night of their lives. Marshal Vance questioned Ezekiel about his war service, his desertion, his years of hiding. But he also observed the dynamic between husband, wife, and son, the quiet respect, the genuine affection, the way Jeremiah unconsciously leaned against Ezekiel's chair as if seeking protection from a beloved father. "You know," the marshal said, "finally, the war's been over for 3 years. Most folks just want to forget and move on. There's been a general amnesty for deserters who've shown themselves to be reformed citizens." "I wasn't aware," Ezekiel said carefully. "Course, you'd have to come into town, swear an oath of allegiance, prove you've been living an honest life." Vance's eyes moved around the cabin again, taking in the handmade furniture, the well-tended garden visible through the window, the family that clearly loved each other. "Seems to me a man who's built this kind of life, who's raising a boy, right? And caring for a good woman, might qualify for such mercy." Hope flickered in Cordelia's chest, but she held her breath, afraid to believe. "There'd be conditions," the marshal continued. "Regular check-ins, community service, proof of honest work. And the town would have to accept you back as a citizen in good standing. And if they won't?" Ezekiel asked. Marshal Vance smiled grimly. "Then I reckon they'll have to answer to me about Christian charity and the meaning of redemption." The next morning, Ezekiel Drummond walked into Millhaven for the first time in 7 years, flanked by his wife and son, with Marshal Vance leading the way to Pastor Henley's church, where the townspeople had been summoned to witness his oath of allegiance. The sanctuary was packed, whispers buzzing like angry bees as the notorious hermit entered. But Cordelia held her head high, her hand firmly clasped in her husband's, while Jeremiah stayed close to Ezekiel's side. Whatever came, they would face it as a family. Pastor Henley, clearly uncomfortable with the proceedings, read the oath in a hurried monotone. But when Ezekiel repeated the words pledging loyalty to the Union and promising to uphold the laws of the land, his voice rang clear and steady through the small church. "Now," Marshal Vance addressed the gathered crowd, "the government considers Mr. Drummond's debt paid. The question before you good people is whether Millhaven is willing to welcome back a reformed citizen who's proven himself through honest living and good works." The silence stretched uncomfortably until old Mrs. Patterson stood creakily from her pew. "That man," she said, pointing a gnarled finger at Ezekiel, "has traded fairly with me for years. Never shortchanged me, never caused trouble. His money was as good as anyone's, and he was more polite than most." Murmurs rippled through the congregation. If crotchety Mrs. Patterson vouched for someone, it carried weight. Then Jeremiah did something that surprised everyone, including his parents. The 7-year-old boy stepped forward and turned to face the assembled townspeople. "My papa isn't perfect," he said in his clear child's voice, "but he's good. He taught me to fish and hunt and be honest and kind. He reads to me every night and says prayers with me and Mama. He's never hit me or been mean, not even when I broke his favorite coffee cup. If being a good papa and husband isn't enough for you people, then maybe you're the ones who need to change." The church fell silent. A child's innocent defense of his father carried more power than any adult's argument. Several women dabbed at their eyes, and even some of the harder men shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Dr. Matthias Crane, the town's physician, rose next. "I've seen this family together. The boy is well cared for, educated, healthy. The woman is clearly content and respected. If we judge people by their fruits rather than their past, what more evidence do we need?" One by one, other voices joined in. The schoolmaster noted that Jeremiah could already read better than children twice his age. The blacksmith admitted he'd seen Ezekiel help neighbors with difficult tasks, never accepting payment. Even Deputy Sheriff Horace Mills acknowledged that crime had actually decreased in the area since Ezekiel's presence, as if his very watchfulness kept troublemakers away. When the informal testimony ended, Pastor Henley called for a show of hands. All in favor of accepting Ezekiel Drummond back into our community as a citizen in good standing? The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. More than 2/3 of the hands rose, including some that surprised everyone. Ezekiel felt Cordelia's fingers tighten in his as tears of relief and gratitude flowed down her cheeks. Marshal Vance nodded approvingly. Then it settled. Mr. Drummond, you're officially pardoned and restored to full citizenship. The conditions I mentioned still apply monthly check-ins with the local law, and I'd recommend finding some way to contribute regularly to the community. That afternoon, as they walked back toward Pine Ridge, Ezekiel stopped suddenly and turned to his wife and son. We could move into town now, if you wanted. Find a proper house, be part of society again. Cordelia looked around at the mountains that had become their sanctuary, then up at the man who had become her anchor. Why would we leave paradise? She asked softly. Jeremiah grinned and ran ahead, chasing a butterfly through the meadow that led to their home. His laughter echoed off the mountains, the sound of pure joy that comes from knowing you belong somewhere, with people who love you exactly as you are. That night, for the first time since their marriage, Ezekiel kissed his wife goodnight, not the polite peck of strangers sharing space, but the tender kiss of a husband who had finally found the courage to love openly. Summer bloomed full and rich around the Pine Ridge cabin, bringing with it a contentment none of the three had dared hope for. Ezekiel had taken Marshal Vance's suggestion to heart and began offering his services to neighboring farms, clearing land, building fences, helping with harvests. His reputation as a reliable worker spread, and soon he had more requests than he could handle. But it was Cordelia who truly surprised the community. Her education and quick mind made her invaluable to families struggling with correspondence, tax forms, and legal documents. Women who had initially shunned her began seeking her help, drawn by her patience and discretion. She never charged for her services, asking only for friendship in return that proved more valuable than gold. Jeremiah thrived in ways that amazed his mother. The shy, withdrawn boy she'd brought from Baltimore had become confident and outgoing, equally comfortable discussing literature with his mother or tracking deer with his stepfather. The mountain air had bronzed his skin and strengthened his small frame, while the security of unconditional love had brightened his spirit. One particularly warm evening in July, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the twilight, Cordelia made an announcement that changed everything. "I'm with child," she said simply, her hand resting on her still flat belly. Ezekiel's whittling knife stilled in his hands. Jeremiah looked up from the book he was reading by lamplight. The words hung in the summer air like a promise of miracles. "Are you certain?" Ezekiel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Cordelia nodded, her eyes shining. Dr. Crane confirmed it this afternoon. The baby should arrive in early spring. Ezekiel set down his carving and moved to kneel beside his wife's chair, placing his large hands gently over hers. "A child?" he breathed. "A child of our own. Will I still be the oldest?" Jeremiah asked, practical as always. "Always," Cordelia laughed, pulling him close. "And the best big brother any baby could hope for." That night, after Jeremiah had gone to bed, Ezekiel and Cordelia sat together in the darkness, planning for the future in ways they'd never dared before. They talked of expanding the cabin, of teaching their children to read and write and think for themselves, of building something lasting in this mountain sanctuary. "I never thought I'd have this," Ezekiel admitted, his arm around his wife's shoulders. "A family, a home, people who love me despite knowing the worst about me." "The worst about you is behind you," Cordelia said firmly. "What matters is who you are now, who you're becoming." As autumn arrived with its spectacular display of color, news came that would test their happiness once more. A letter arrived from Baltimore from the charitable home where Cordelia had lived. The woman who ran it, Miss Prudence Hartwell, was coming for a visit, ostensibly to check on one of her former charges. She never approved of my decision to marry through correspondence, Cordelia told Ezekiel worriedly. She believes in women's suffrage and independence, that marriage is just another form of bondage for women. And now? Cordelia looked around their cabin, at the life they'd built together, at Jeremiah helping his stepfather repair a broken chair. Leg. Now I know the difference between bondage and partnership. Miss Hartwell arrived on the October stage, a stern woman of 50 with graying hair pulled into a severe bun and clothes that spoke of progressive politics and feminist ideologies. She clearly expected to find Cordelia reduced to domestic drudgery and mountain isolation. Instead, she found a woman glowing with pregnancy and happiness, managing household affairs while also serving as the unofficial schoolmarm and legal advisor for half the county. She found a marriage built on mutual respect and shared responsibilities, where intellectual discussions were as common as household chores. You seem content, Miss Hartwell admitted after spending 3 days observing their life. I am, Cordelia replied simply, more than content. I'm fulfilled. And your education, your intellectual gifts, are being used every day. I teach Jeremiah and help our neighbors. Ezekiel and I discuss philosophy and politics by the fire each evening. I'm writing a book about mountain flora that Dr. Crane believes could be published. My mind isn't wasted here. It's flourishing. Miss Hartwell departed with grudging approval, leaving behind a small gift for the expected baby and admission that perhaps there were many ways for a woman to find fulfillment. As winter approached once more, the family prepared for the new addition with joy and anticipation. Ezekiel carved a cradle from maple wood. Cordelia sewed tiny clothes from the softest fabric she could find, and Jeremiah practiced lullabies he planned to sing to his new sibling. Their happiness was complete, rooted in love that had grown from necessity into choice, from convenience into deep, abiding devotion. Spring arrived with unusual warmth, melting snow into rushing streams that sang of renewal and new beginnings. On a morning when apple blossoms perfumed the mountain air, Cordelia gave birth to a daughter with her father's steel blue eyes and her mother's determined chin. They named her Serenity. Hope Drummond Serenity for the peace she brought to their lives, hope for the future she represented. Dr. Crane, who had ridden through the night to assist with the birth, proclaimed her perfect in every way. Jeremiah, now 8 and wise beyond his years, held his baby sister with the reverence of someone who understood the miracle of new life. She's beautiful, Mama, he whispered, and she has Papa's eyes. Ezekiel, the man who had once killed with those same hands, now cradled his daughter with infinite tenderness. Tears streamed down his weathered cheeks as he gazed into the face of his child, proof that even the most broken souls could create something pure and good. As summer progressed, Serenity became the darling of the entire community. Women who had once crossed the street to avoid Cordelia now made regular visits to Pine Ridge, bringing gifts and advice. Men who had feared Ezekiel sought his counsel on everything from farming techniques to child rearing. The family that had been outcasts was now at the heart of Millhaven's social fabric. The transformation was most visible during the town's harvest festival in September. The Drummond family arrived not as reluctant participants, but as honored guests. Ezekiel had been elected to the town council. Cordelia was organizing the new lending library, and Jeremiah was the star pupil of the expanded school. As the evening wound down and families began heading home, Marshall Vance approached them one final time. His monthly visits had become social calls rather than official duties, but this would be his last. My work here is done, he told Ezekiel, shaking his hand firmly. You've proven that redemption is possible for anyone willing to do the work. Thank you, Ezekiel replied, for seeing what I could become instead of just what I had been. That's what mercy looks like, the marshal replied, and you've paid it forward 100-fold. As winter settled over Pine Ridge once more, the Drummond cabin glowed with warmth and laughter. Jeremiah, now 9, helped his stepfather with the heavier chores while studying Latin and mathematics with his mother. Baby Serenity crawled everywhere, exploring her world with fearless curiosity. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell softly outside, their windows, the family gathered around their simple tree, a pine Ezekiel had cut from their own land and decorated with ornaments Cordelia had crafted. Jeremiah read the nativity story aloud while his parents held their sleeping daughter. "Do you ever regret it?" Ezekiel asked his wife quietly as they prepared for bed. "Answering that advertisement, coming to a man you'd never met?" Cordelia looked around their bedroom, at the cradle where their daughter slept peacefully, at the window that showed mountains dusted with snow, at the man who had become her heart's true companion. "Never," she said firmly. "This is exactly where I was meant to be." Years later, when Jeremiah was grown and had children of his own, when Serenity had brothers and sisters to fill the expanded cabin with noise and joy, when Ezekiel's hair had gone completely gray and Cordelia moved more slowly due to her clubfoot and age, people would still talk about the miracle of Pine Ridge. They would tell the story of the exiled soldier and the rejected mail-order bride who found in each other not just companionship, but a love that transformed not only their own lives but the entire community around them. They would speak of how two broken people, cast out by society, had created something beautiful and lasting that blessed everyone who knew them, and in the evenings, when the mountain air was sweet with the scent of wildflowers and the phalodos and the sound of children's laughter echoed through the valleys, Ezekiel and Cordelia would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the peaks that had sheltered their love story. They had found what every heart seeks: a place to belong, people to love, and the peace that comes from knowing you are exactly where you were meant to be. In a world that had rejected them both, they had built their own paradise, and it was more than enough. It was everything.